It was a quiet evening in a suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, or thought they did. The streetlights buzzed faintly as the last hues of sunset faded into darkness. Among the small clusters of people heading home or walking their dogs, one figure stood out. She was a tall, confident black woman dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, carrying a gym bag slung over her shoulder. She moved with an ease that suggested she wasn't in a hurry, yet there was an undeniable strength in her stride. Her name was Maya, though few in the area knew much about her. She'd only recently moved in, and her quiet demeanor had kept her somewhat of a mystery. Some assumed she was a student, others thought she might work in tech or fitness. What nobody knew was that Maya had a past she rarely spoke about, a past that had shaped her into someone far stronger than she looked. For Maya was no ordinary woman. She was a former Navy SEAL, trained to endure and overcome challenges most people couldn't even fathom. That evening, as Maya walked home from the gym, she noticed a group of men loitering near a corner store. At first, she paid them little mind. They were loud, joking around and shoving each other like they owned the sidewalk. But something about their energy shifted as she passed. The laughter stopped. She could feel their eyes on her, a heavy, uncomfortable gaze that followed her every step. "Hey, where you headed?" one of them called out, his voice tripping with mock friendliness. Maya didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that acknowledging such comments rarely led anywhere good. "Oh, so you're too good to talk to us now," another chimed in, his tone sharper. The group laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that carried warmth. It was pointed, aggressive. Maya kept walking, her heartbeat steady, her focus sharp. She could feel their attention intensify as she moved further away. "Hey, I'm talking to you," one of them shouted louder this time. She could hear the scrape of footsteps as someone started following her. Maya glanced over her shoulder and saw three of them trailing her now, their postures tense and predatory. A surge of adrenaline shot through her veins, but she kept her pace even. She knew what they were doing. They wanted her to react, to show fear. But Maya had been trained for moments like this. She could handle far worse. The men closed the distance, and one of them stepped in front of her, blocking her path. He was tall and wiry, with a smug grin that made Maya's stomach turn. "Where you think you're going?" he sneered, his voice low and threatening. The rest of the group circled around her, cutting off any escape routes. Their body language screamed intimidation, but Maya stood her ground, her expression calm. She knew she had two choices: escalate the situation or de-escalate it. For now, she chose the latter. "Excuse me," she said evenly, her voice steady and firm. "I'm just trying to get home." "Oh, we'll get you home," one of them said with a leer, and the group burst into laughter. But their amusement was short-lived. As one of them reached out to grab her arm, Maya's instincts kicked in. Her movements were lightning fast, almost too quick to follow. Before the man could make contact, Maya had stepped aside, twisting his arm in a way that sent him stumbling backward with a yelp. The others froze, clearly not expecting any resistance, let alone someone who knew exactly how to disable an attacker. One of them stammered, but before he could finish, Maya's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. "Don't." There was something in her tone that made them hesitate, a quiet authority that hinted at experience. For a moment, the group seemed unsure, their bravado cracking under the weight of her presence. But then, as if trying to save face, one of them lunged forward, fists clenched. Maya was ready. What happened next would leave the group, and anyone who heard the story, questioning everything they thought they knew about her. But for now, the tension hung in the air, thick and unrelenting. Maya's eyes narrowed, and she took a step forward, her voice calm but deadly serious. "You really don't want to do this." And then everything changed. The man who lunged at Maya clearly underestimated her. His movements were clumsy and uncoordinated, a far cry from the precision and focus she had spent years honing. To him, she was just another woman he could intimidate. To Maya, he was a predictable threat, one she had seen countless times in her career and training. She sidestepped with practiced ease, her movements fluid and calculated. His momentum carried him past her, and with a quick pivot, she placed herself out of his reach. The group around them erupted in a mixture of confusion and anger. This wasn't how they had expected things to go. They thrived on fear, on the power imbalance they created in moments like this. But Maya wasn't playing along. Her calmness, her poise, it unnerved them. "Who do you think you are?" one of them barked, stepping forward aggressively. His chest puffed up as if he were trying to make himself appear bigger. Maya's sharp eyes flicked toward him, assessing every detail, the tension in his stance, the way his hands clenched into fists, the bravado in his voice that didn't quite hide the uncertainty beneath. Maya said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was more disarming than any words could have been. It gave her an air of control, of power they couldn't quite understand. The leader of the group, the wiry man with the smug grin, stepped closer. He was clearly the one trying to keep the others in line, to hold on to whatever illusion of authority he had. "Big mistake," he sneered, his voice low and threatening. "You think you can just walk through here and act like you're better than us? Like you're untouchable?" Maya held his gaze unflinching. Inside, her mind was racing, but outwardly, she projected nothing but confidence. She had been in far more dangerous situations than this, and she knew how to stay composed under pressure. But something about this encounter was different. It wasn't just the usual street harassment. There was an edge to their behavior, a kind of hostility she couldn't ignore. They weren't just looking for trouble, they were looking for someone to hurt. As the tension mounted, Maya's mind drifted briefly to her past. She thought about her training, the grueling hours spent in conditions designed to break even the strongest. She remembered the drills, the mental fortitude it took to push through pain and fear. But more than that, she remembered why she had joined the Navy in the first place. Growing up, Maya had faced her share of challenges. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and targeted because of her race and gender. But she had never let that define her. Instead, she used it as fuel, a reason to prove not just to others, but to herself that she was capable of anything. Her time in the Navy had solidified that belief. It had taught her how to channel her strength, how to defend herself and others, and most importantly, how to stay calm in the face of chaos. She thought about her squad mates, the bonds they had formed, the missions they had undertaken together. They had trusted her with their lives, just as she had trusted them with hers. Those experiences had shaped her into the person she was today, someone who refused to back down, no matter the odds. The wiry man's voice snapped her back to the present. "What's the matter? Got nothing to say now?" He taunted, stepping even closer. His breath smelled faintly of alcohol, and his eyes glinted with malice. The others began to close in as well, creating a tight circle around her. Maya's pulse quickened, but her face remained impassive. She was calculating, analyzing every possible move, every potential outcome. She didn't want this to escalate further. Despite her training, despite her ability to handle herself, she knew that violence was rarely the best solution. But she also knew that sometimes people left you with no choice. "Listen," she said finally, her voice steady and controlled. "I don't want any trouble. Let me walk away, and this ends here." The leader laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made Maya's jaw tighten. "You get that, boys? She doesn't want any trouble. Well, too bad, because trouble just found you." The others joined in, their laughter echoing off the nearby buildings. Maya's eyes darted to the shadows beyond them, checking for witnesses, for anyone who might step in. But the street was eerily empty now, as if the world had conspired to leave her alone with these men. The leader reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, menacing object that glinted under the streetlights. Maya's heart sank as she recognized it. A knife. It wasn't the first time she'd faced a weapon, but it always added an extra layer of danger. The others watched eagerly, their faces twisted with anticipation. They thought they had her cornered, that the knife would tip the scales in their favor. But Maya wasn't afraid, not really. Fear was a natural response, but she had learned to control it, to channel it into focus. She shifted her weight slightly, her stance winding just enough to prepare herself for what might come next. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. There was no pleading, no panic, just a quiet warning. "Because I promise you, it won't end the way you think." The leader hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Maya to notice. She could see the doubt flicker across his face, the tiny crack in his confidence. But he quickly masked it, puffing out his chest and waving the knife in her direction. "Big talk for someone who's outnumbered," he sneered. "You think you're some kind of superhero." Maya didn't answer. Instead, she let the silence hang between them, heavy and unyielding. Her gaze never left his, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink around them, leaving just the two of them locked in a battle of wills. The others shifted nervously, their bravado faltering in the face of Maya's unshakable composure. They had expected her to crumble, to beg, to run. But she had done none of those things. Instead, she stood before them, unyielding, unafraid, a force they couldn't quite understand. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. The leader lunged forward, the knife flashing toward her. But Maya was faster. Years of training kicked in as she moved with precision and purpose, her body reacting almost before her mind registered the threat. What happened next would leave the men, and anyone who heard the story, questioning everything they thought they knew about Maya. But for now, the air crackled with tension, the outcome still uncertain. The knife came toward Maya, swift but sloppy. She sidestepped effortlessly, catching the man's wrist mid-swing and twisting it with a precise motion. The blade clattered to the ground, the sound sharp against the tense silence. The man cried out in pain, clutching his wrist as he stumbled back. His bravado crumbled in an instant, replaced by a mix of confusion and fear. For a brief moment, the other men froze. They hadn't expected this. To them, Maya had been an easy target, someone to corner, intimidate, and overpower. But now, watching their leader reel from her calculated move, doubt crept into their eyes. The carefully constructed illusion of their dominance was cracking, and Maya could see it. "Anyone else want to try it?" she said, her voice calm but laced with authority. Her heart was pounding, but she didn't let it show. She couldn't afford to. Confidence was her greatest weapon here, even more than her training. The men exchanged uncertain glances, that earlier bravado faltering. But one of them, a stocky man with a shaved head, stepped forward, trying to reclaim control of the situation. "She got lucky," he growled. "There's 4 of us and 1 of her. Let's finish this." The others hesitated, their movements sluggish as if they were reconsidering the wisdom of this plan. But the stocky man lunged, his fists swinging wildly. Maya braced herself, her body moving instinctively as she blocked and redirected his strikes. He was stronger than the first, but his aggression made him predictable. She ducked under a wide swing and countered with a precise strike to the shoulder, forcing him off balance. The fight wasn't chaotic, it was controlled, almost clinical. For Maya, every move had purpose, every step a strategy. But for the men, it was panic and rage, their attempts to overpower her unraveling with every failed attack. The leader, still clutching his wrist, shouted something incoherent, trying to rally the others. But it was no use. They were losing the fight before it had truly begun. One of the younger men in the group, barely out of his teens, took a step back, his face pale. "This is crazy," he muttered. "She's not normal." Maya heard him but didn't let it distract her. She focused on the immediate threats, her mind racing as she calculated her next moves. She didn't want this to escalate further, but she also knew she couldn't let her guard down. The men weren't just a physical threat. They were unpredictable, their desperation making them dangerous. Then from the corner of her eye, Maya noticed movement, a bystander peeking out from behind a nearby parked car. It was an older woman, clutching a phone, her face etched with worry. Maya's chest tightened. She wasn't sure if the woman was calling for help or simply filming the scene, but either way, it added another layer of complexity to the situation. If the police arrived, they'd see a chaotic fight with little context, and Maya wasn't sure how that would play out. She had learned the hard way that justice wasn't always fair. "Enough," Maya said sharply, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. She straightened, her stance wide and grounded, and glared at the group. "Walk away. Now." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. The men hesitated, their earlier confidence completely eroded. The leader, still nursing his injured wrist, glared at her with a mix of anger and fear. "This isn't over," he spat, but there was no conviction in his voice. One by one, the group began to retreat, their steps slow and reluctant. The stocky man shot her a glare as he backed away, but he didn't say anything. The younger one avoided her gaze entirely, his head bowed as if in shame. Finally, they were gone, their figures disappearing into the shadows of the night. Maya exhaled, her shoulders relaxing slightly. But the tension in her chest remained. She wasn't naive enough to believe this was truly over. People like that didn't just let things go. They would stew in their humiliation, their egos bruised, and there was no telling what they might do next. The older woman stepped out from behind the car, her phone still in hand. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I was about to call the police." Maya nodded, forcing a small smile. "I'm fine, thank you, but if they come back, you should definitely call." The woman hesitated, her eyes scanning Maya as if trying to make sense of what she had just witnessed. You were amazing," she said finally. "Are you some kind of martial artist?" Maya chuckled softly, though there was little humor in it. "Something like that." The woman seemed like she wanted to ask more, but Maya didn't give her the chance. She picked up her gym bag, slinging it over her shoulder, and started walking away. Her mind was already racing with questions of her own. Who were those men, and why had they singled her out? Was it random? Or was there something more to it? And most importantly, what would they do next? As she made her way home, the streets eerily quiet now, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The encounter had stirred something in her, memories of her time in the Navy, of the battles she had fought both on and off the field. It wasn't just about physical strength or skill. It was about the mental and emotional resilience it took to face adversity head-on. Maya thought about her family, her friends, the people who mattered most to her. She had moved to this neighborhood for a fresh start, hoping to leave behind the chaos and danger of her past. But tonight had been a harsh reminder that trouble could find you anywhere. And while she was more than capable of defending herself, she couldn't help but wonder if she would ever truly escape the shadows of her old life. As she reached her apartment building, Maya paused at the door, glancing over her shoulder. The street was empty, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, locking the door behind her. The night wasn't over yet, and neither was the story. In the back of her mind, she knew she hadn't seen the last of those men. And while she didn't know what they were planning, she knew one thing for certain. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Maya woke up the next morning with a strange heaviness in her chest. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind like a movie on a loop. She had gone through every moment, every detail, analyzing the situation from all angles. Her training taught her to always stay vigilant, to assess threats not just in the moment but in the aftermath. And something about the way those men had acted, the way they had retreated, didn't sit right with her. They weren't finished. She could feel it. As she brewed her morning coffee, Maya found herself glancing at the windows, scanning the quiet street below. Her neighborhood was usually peaceful, but today it felt different. Tense, charged. She couldn't shake the sense that eyes were on her, that someone was watching. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. And her instincts were rarely wrong. By mid-afternoon, Maya decided to take a walk. She needed to clear her head and shake the restless energy that had settled in her bones. She threw on a jacket and tucked her phone into her pocket before stepping outside. The winter air was crisp and biting, and the streets were lined with the remnants of slushy snow. A few neighbors waved to her as she passed, their smiles warm and unsuspecting. Maya returned the greetings, but her mind was elsewhere. Her steps carried her to the park, a quiet stretch of green space on the edge of the neighborhood. It was one of her favorite spots, a place where she could let her guard down, if only for a little while. She walked the winding paths, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. For a while, the stillness of the park soothed her, but then she noticed something that made her pulse quicken. A figure stood near the edge of the park, partially obscured by a cluster of trees. It was one of the men from the night before, the younger one, the one who had hesitated to engage. He wasn't alone. A second man joined him, the wiry leader with the smug grin. They were trying to blend in, pretending to be two guys out for a walk, but their furtive glances gave them away. They were watching her. Maya's first instinct was to confront them, but she held back. She needed more information, needed to understand what they were planning. Instead of approaching, she continued her walk, keeping her pace steady and natural. But her senses were on high alert, her eyes scanning for exits and potential threats. She could feel the weight of their stares as she moved, could sense their presence even when she wasn't looking directly at them. As she looped back toward the park entrance, she spotted a third man. This one was new, someone she hadn't seen before. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially hidden by a baseball cap. He stood near the main path, his posture casual but deliberate. They were trying to corner her. Maya's mind raced. She couldn't let herself get trapped here, but she also couldn't show fear. Fear would embolden them. Instead, she adjusted her route, veering toward a side path that led back to the street. She walked briskly, her steps measured, her breathing controlled. The park was quiet, with only a few scattered visitors, none close enough to intervene if things went wrong. She glanced over her shoulder and saw the wiry leader following her now, his pace matching hers. The other two were hanging back, creating a triangle of movement around her. They thought they were being clever, that she wouldn't notice their coordination. But Maya had seen this tactic before. It was textbook intimidation, a strategy designed to make the target feel surrounded and powerless. But Maya wasn't powerless. As she neared the edge of the park, she turned down an even narrower path, one that led to a quiet residential street. It was a calculated risk. The path was secluded, but it also gave her the advantage of funneling them into a tighter space. If they wanted to make a move, they would have to do it here on her terms. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind her. They were closing in now, abandoning their attempts at subtlety. Maya stopped walking and turned to face them. The warrior leader was only a few steps away, his grin as smug as ever. The younger man and the tall one flanked him, their expressions a mix of anger and determination. "We told you this wasn't over," the leader said, his voice low and menacing. "You made us look stupid last night. Now it's time to pay for that." Maya tilted her head, her expression calm despite the tension crackling in the air. "You came all this way to embarrass yourselves again?" she asked, her voice steady. "I think you'd learn by now." The leader's grin faltered for a moment, but he recovered quickly. "You think you're tough because you got lucky. Let's see how tough you really are." The tall man stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Maya shifted her stance slightly, grounding herself. Her eyes flicked to the younger man, who still hung back, his hesitation clear. There was a chance, however small, that he could be an ally if things went south, but she couldn't count on that. Not yet. The tension in the air was thick, the kind that made time feel slower, heavier. Maya's muscles coiled like springs, her mind calculating every possibility. She knew this wasn't going to end with words. Not this time. The fight was coming, and she had to be ready.